Hey guys, we're here today doing a starter Pokemon tier list, but this is not your mother's starter Pokemon tier list. No, this is a 2022 official fully evolved starter Pokemon plus every alternate variation tier list. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and if you do, leave a like below and subscribe for more content like this. I'll try and get another video up this weekend, of course, if possible. So if you guys have any ideas for that, I would love to see them in the comments, and yours might just be chosen. I'm going to try and make another tier list and or discussion video for tomorrow's, so if you have any ideas for that, would love to hear them. But with that said, let's get into this. So, first things first, I decided to include any Pokemon that was either a fully evolved starter or a form of a fully evolved starter. This includes Pokemon like, for example, Ash Greninja, Gigantamax Inteleon, or Megazord X and or Y. I figured this would be the best way to do it because obviously, a lot of people come to this channel for competitive content, don't really care about seeing the specific, what is my favorite design for Samurott. I'm sure some people do, but most people probably don't. If you want to see that tier list, let me know down below. I might upload that next week just as a comparison. But with that said though, I'm going to go into my thoughts on these Pokemon competitively as they average among all their respective metagames that they are possible in. So for example, you won't see a Megazord X comparison for this gen's VGC because it's just not usable there. But I will weigh it off of its NatDex usage as well as past gen usage for regardless of the format. So this will really go for everything. I'm going to go through everything Gen 7 and 8. Well, actually, Gen 6 through 8, because those are, like, the modern metagames, considering that's when the last major, type change and all that happened, being Fairy. So, ever since then, that's what I'm going to wait, because a lot of these Pokemon, obviously, were usable in Gen 7. Or shall I go with Gen 7 and 8, I think is the best way to put it, because Gen 7 was the last gen where, all of these Pokemon, at least, were usable as of their conception. So, Gen 7 and 8 will be what I'm going to weigh off of. I think that's what I've decided. And with that said, let's start off with the Gigantamax Venusaur. So Gigantamax Venusaur is a nightmare in VGC, and that's really the only format we actually have to weigh off of. Even in Ubers, when it was allowed for a short time, it was still a pretty good Pokemon, albeit I personally like Gmax Zard a little bit more in Ubers, by a very slim margin. But to be fair, Gmax Venusaur is still a really good option with Groudon pairings, and in terms of doubles, this is a nightmare. This is a really good Kyogre Sponge for Groudon teams. It's basically the only reason that Groudon is as viable as it is, in my personal opinion, especially with how much Kyogre is going around. This mon is literally the Pokemon that actually saves Sun. So I think I'm going to give this an easy A tier. This might go up to S tier, to be completely honest. I think just off of the fact that it really only has one metagame to really weigh off of, being VGC. But we'll see what happens with that one. That might go up to S tier though. Mega Venusaur, on the other hand, I think I'm going to give this one a B tier. This is a Pokemon that, while in Gen 6 would have probably gotten an A tier, it sort of weighed down a little bit in terms of Gen 7, considering the fact that obviously not many people, if any, were really using it in VGC. And on top of that as well, one thing that Mega Venusaur really had going out of its favor was the Z-Move edition, because Z-Moves obviously were a phenomenal way to break this Pokemon in the previous generation. Now, to be fair, what I will give Venusaur is that it isn't terrible currently. For example, if we were to pull up NatDex viability, this Pokemon, if I know it's at least ranked, I don't think it's ranked very high, but it is definitely at least ranked. If we were to pull up for Venusaur's current rating, Venusaur currently resides in the B-ish range, being very, actually, I don't even think, it doesn't even seem to come up anymore in the ratings. So I guess Venusaur really did fall off at NatDex, even still. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't exactly ranking that high anyway, but I think a B is a fair rating, I would say. Regular Venusaur, on the other hand, I gotta give this one also a B. The fact that this one actually is viable in OU, it's currently usable in Sword and Shield OU as well. And I don't think it's terrible there. I wouldn't say it's amazing there, but it's definitely far from terrible, in my personal opinion. Currently, Hail's obviously, better playstyle, but this is definitely still a usable Pokemon in quotations. In doubles, though, this Pokemon is a nightmare. If you don't even need to Gmax it, unlike with something like a Charizard, for example, where you need to Gmax it to bring it. This is still a usable Pokemon outside of Max, so, it's really usable with Pokemon such as Groudon that could potentially max in that turn. So I would definitely put this on par with Mega Venusaur. I think, truthfully, just the fact that it's currently outclassed as a weather sweeper, considering the fact that you don't really want to run any weather that's not sand or hail in current metas, with the exception of sometimes rain, but rain's very much in and out. At least as far as Sword and Shield goes, maybe not as much in NatDex, but it's definitely that way in Sword and Shield OU at least. So regardless, though, definitely gotta give Venusaur a regular B+. Gmax Blastoise, I gotta give this one a C. I feel like of the Kanto starters, while this one isn't bad, it is definitely the objective worst in my personal opinion. Still a really good option, of course. I've noticed, especially with a few VG teams, I've watched from Randy mostly. Shout out to my pal Randy HLD. Not a streamer, but he streams anyway. But Randy, of course, has been playing a lot of VGC, and I've watched some of his stuff to, you know, sort of pick up on the metagame. And I've noticed he's played a lot of teams where, and maybe it's just Randy's build specifically not being up to par, but I've noticed with a lot of teams that I've watched that they really crumble this Pokemon because of how Kyogre was at the rain for it. So as long as you pair it with a good Kyogre counter, I feel like it's really good in VGC. However, I would still definitely put it below the Zard and Mega Venusaur, or the Zard and Venusaur tier for Gmaxes, considering those Pokemon are absolute nightmares with Groudon. And I feel like that Blastoise, unlike with Venusaur and Charizard, really depends on your opponent's team to be filthy, whereas those Pokemon are just outright filthy. So with that said, next up is Empoleon. Now, Empoleon, I'm not gonna lie, some people might hate the rating for this because of the fact that I'm including this, but I'm gonna include the buffs from Legends Arceus in this Pokemon, and the reason I'm doing so is because of stuff like Samurott and Hisuian form being in the list. So I feel like it is fair to, if we're gonna include the Hisuian starters, to include the moves that got added to Pokemon from the Hisuian region. So with that in mind, I honestly have to give Empoleon an A. Having Roost in this Pokemon is actually really good for it, and even if we're going to take out the Roost, this is still a really good Pokemon in BDSP OU, and it's also a really good Pokemon in BDSP doubles, considering the fact that it has stuff like Defiant, for example, in its favor, as well as just really good typing and general bulk, with a really versatile stat spread. I feel like this is definitely an easy A tier Pokemon, and truthfully, this could maybe go up to S, but I would have to see some showcase with Roost before I felt comfortable in that. Just among starters, to be fair, most of them don't really hit that S tier. There are a couple though, and that is specifically why when I get into those starters that do hit S tier, you'll see why I didn't put Venusaur just immediately there, but it could maybe end up there, and we'll see how the list scales. Next up, Hisuian Typhlosion. This is honestly a D tier. I'm gonna tell you right now, we'll put both the Hisuian starters for this form in D, and I'm going to put Samurott in C. I'm going to put Samurott above just because the fact that its typing is a little bit safer and its move pool and stat spread are a little bit safer, but none of these are really that good as of right now. To be fair, this could change with transfer, but currently as of the day I'm recording this tier list, and maybe it's a little bit unkind to do this tier list a couple days before the big home day, where you might potentially get some transfer details for these. I will say, as of right now of recording this, Samurott is definitely the best of the starters, and I think that all three are pretty garbage though, at least competitively speaking. We don't really have a metagame to go off of, but their movesets are so limited, even if you include their signature moves, they're pretty terrible. If you include them, maybe at best, Sichuan gets a C tier, but they're all pretty terrible. They have no coverage. Most of them don't really have any form of recovery or barely any setup. And if in the cases where they do have setup, it's not exactly really super good setup. With Sichuan, for example, has Bulk Up, but it doesn't really have a good move outside of maybe Triple Arrows, fighting-wise, to actually abuse it. Its next best move is Rock Smash, so whether you count Triple Arrows or not, it's potentially also cucked by maybe getting changed over once we see how Triple Arrows impacts, because it's obviously not going to keep the same exact settings it did have for Legends Arceus, because the competitive system entirely in that game does not exist, and the in-game battle format is entirely different. So I feel pretty comfortable weighing both Typhlosion and Decidueye in D tier and Samurott in C tier. I'm gonna get it out of the way. I've gotten all the people who clicked on this specifically to see those ratings in for 8 minutes now. They can continue if they want to. They can rage in the comments if they don't. That's perfectly fine. But next up we have Gator. Gator gets an easy B tier. Not exactly a great Pokemon in... Actually, I'm gonna give Gator a C tier. Not a great Pokemon in doubles by any sense, but Gator does have BDSP OU currently going for it. Not really a good nationalist Pokemon. That's because of stuff like, for example, Toxapex and Tangrowth being just such a good regen core, or really Toxapex plus any grass type for that matter, being such a phenomenal way to really sponge this Pokemon. It's actually obnoxiously hard to set this up in any metagame that is not BDSP. However, BDSP, this is a nightmare. I'll give it that. It's truthfully, we might bump this up to D, to B, depending on how the list scales. We might even just make an F tier and scale down Samurott, Typhlosion, and Decidueye, depending on how the list goes. But for now, this is how I'm going to do it. Next was Mega Sceptile. Mega Sceptile, actually, you know, I'm going to do that because I want to put Mega Sceptile in D tier, but I definitely don't want to do it right now. So what we're going to do, this is going to be the F tier, and we're going to scale down U, and we're going to put Sceptile in D tier. Sceptile was a Pokemon that was really good pre-Gen 7, to be honest. In the generation where a lot of Pokemon really suffered from speed boost, the fact that this didn't have a super good moveset benefited because it could get away with running Protect fairly easily, in my opinion, to get that instant speed boost. And a lot of other Megas, stuff like, for example, Gallade and Gardevoir, really hurt from running that Protect slot in games where it might have actually very much so needed it. So I think with that in mind, Sceptile definitely hurts a lot for more modern generations. How Mega Evolution functions currently, not to say it's a terrible Mega, but it's a pretty bad one. I wouldn't say, though, it's unusable, like, you know, to ban it, Abomasnow standards, but It's definitely a bit hard to pull off. You could maybe make this work in lower tiers, for example. In doubles, it's actually not that bad, at least in generations where it was usable, because Lightning Rod was really good support, but it was still definitely a more niche option, even with all of that in mind. Subtiles still could, for example, in doubles and previous gens, pair well with stuff like Kyogre, for example, be a really good option to opposing waters, and then still Lightning Rod for Kyogre, which was incredible. But that's really the extent of Subtile usage I can really think of for Mega, and even still, there were better options on Kyogre teams, like for example, Mega Ray was a pretty no-drawback option. So with that in mind, I definitely gotta give it a D tier. This is a Pokemon that really benefits off of specific metagames rather than itself ever carrying, so I can't really in good conscience put it in C, whereas for example, Gator at the very least isn't dependent on other Pokemon, like a couple of other Pokemon being usable. It is at least usable entirely in one metagame. Same for Blastoise, it's at least, while it's not necessarily a standout pick in VGC, it at the very least can take advantage of a good, like a very, very popular Pokemon and completely invalidate most of its supporting partners. So I think with that in mind, Subtile is really dependent on not only a specific Pokemon to be usable in VGC, but it's also a Pokemon that you can't even really use anymore, and even if it was usable in this current modern metagame, Subtile would still have a lot of competition as a Mega. Even if you could use Megas, I don't think it would be that good, because of stuff like Ice Horse running around and Groudon being a lot more viable. So with that in mind, I gotta put Subtile in D, because even if it's one metagame that it was usable in, even to a slight degree, it would no longer be that good in. If, of course, G-Max mechanics carried over. But Blaziken Mega, easy S tier. This is probably going to be the best Pokemon we have in the entire tier list. Blaziken Mega is by far the best starter and starter form. So for anyone who clicked on just to see that one, again, you fulfilled my 11 minutes of watch time. I appreciate that you're giving me at least 30% watch time. With that said, though, let's get into Mega Purr, which Mega Purr is honestly, again, an easy A tier. Rain is phenomenal, especially with options like Flip Turn getting added to Swampert as a whole. Makes this an absolute nightmare. I guess for Blaziken, the reason why this is also S tier for Mega Blaziken, some people might point to stuff like, Zygarde and Pedon, but this having U-turn is actually really good in a counter team setting, gives Blaziken some really good momentum gaining for it, and also just gives an option to pivot in case of metagames start banning Baton Pass, so that it's not just locked in positioning wise, it could actually pivot and then maybe go for a cleaning roll. So I definitely like Mega Blaziken more in that regard. I actually think because of that, I would put it above regular Blaziken now personally, just by a sliver of a margin. But Purr really does actually benefit from that in OU. It allows Rain teams actually to be thriving in that dex, and I think it's the only reason that Rain is as viable as it is in that dex. But with that said, Purr is an easy A tier. Infernape is also an easy A tier. In terms of starters for VGC, this is probably as viable as you can get besides Incineroar, of course. But before Incineroar existed, this was a premier starters in terms of VGC. It was one of the only ones that got fake out. It has some really good support outside of that with options like Resimple Fast Taunt, really good stab combination as well for a lot of metagame. And even still in Gen 7, when Incineroar was introduced, this is still a somewhat niche Pokemon to be used, considering the fact that it's a Pokemon that can actually hit Incineroar really well and still give fake out support to a team. Albeit, it is nowhere near as usable now because of Incineroar being just that good. But in singles, this is still a fairly good Pokemon, whether you're talking about Nadex with Z moves, or Gen 7 with Z moves, or even just BDSP OU, where this is one of the best Pokemon in the entire metagame. This is still a fairly good Pokemon. I just think that it's definitely lost its touch because of just general power creep. G-Max Zard, I gotta give G-Max Zard a B tier, and the reason I put it below G-Max Venusaur, because while I think that both inherently are really good Pokemon, the difference being is that with Venusaur, you're not forced to pop that G-Max. The only exception would probably just be against Max Kyogre. That is probably an important exception. But generally, you're not forced to max with Venusaur. Zard, if you're bringing Zard, you have to max it. So it is a Pokemon that will limit your options at the very least, unlike Venusaur, where it is a very fluid Pokemon. Even if you want the Gigantamax, you don't need to pop it turn 1. Zard will need it instantaneously, that'd ever be good. At least in terms of doubles, which is the only format you'd really use G-Max in. So with that in mind, this also carries over to obviously when it was allowable in Ubers, it's the same sort of thing. Venusaur at least could do something without a max. Zard needs it to be outright usable. So Zard definitely gets a B tier, because while both maxes are as good, Zard just has a lot less options of when to pop it. Megazard X gets an easy A tier. Zard Y also gets an easy A tier. These are both phenomenal options in OU, for example. Actually, I'm gonna give Zard Y a B tier. Biggest reason being for Zard Y is the fact that you can't change the 4x rock weakness, which currently is a lot more valuable, considering teams do have options for boots. So if you're going to pick a 4x weak fire, just pick Volcarona at that point. Zard Y would really just be for sun, but even still you have other sun options that aren't 4x weak for fire that can also run boots anyway. Stuff like Torkoal, for example. So I think Zard Y loses a bit of its touch. Now to be fair, if this was in terms of doubles, this is actually a fairly cool option, but I still don't think it's cool enough to really bump it out of B tier. And Zardex, on the other hand, is a really good physical fire. It's one of the few really phenomenal ones, considering the next best physical fires are stuff like Blaziken, like regular Blaziken, which actually regular Blaziken is probably better. The next best would probably be arguably Infernape in terms of nat deck setting. And yeah, I feel like that Infernape is still really good because it still has item slot usage, sure, but Zardex is just such a phenomenal breaker, which Infernape isn't doing, and most physical fires aren't just breaking outright for that matter because of the Tough Claws being so good on this. The only one that truly breaks as well as Zard does for Zardex will be stuff like Darmanitan or Low Marowak. They're really the only fires that truly physically wise would break as well as Zardex does. Cleaning is another story, but in terms of breakers, they're really the only two that compare. So I think Zardex gets a nice niche in A tier as it is without a mine alone. Charizard gets D tier. It's not a bad option. If this was before Boots, this would be an easy F tier. But I think with Boots, this actually gets a really nice usage in lower tiers, especially in lower tiers where you could pop like a Manual Sun and just start wrecking with spec sets. With stuff like Weather Ball 2, this is actually a really terrifying fire option in low tiers, because a lot of lower tiers struggle to switch it in stuff like Solar Beam plus Air Slash or Hurricane plus Fire Move plus Focus Blast. Like, it's a very, very tough combination to switch it on. So I think if nothing else, with the Boots or Specs, this could bluff either and really be good. So honestly, I'd give it D tier. Mega Blastoise, I forgot about Mega Blastoise having Smash, to be honest, because I'm so used to playing it in Draft where they ban it. This is another easy S tier. Having Smash makes this Pokemon really obnoxious. It got banned from OU pretty quickly, actually, which not even regular Blaziken can currently do. So I gotta give it an easy S tier for that. This is one of those Pokemon that if it was currently allowable in doubles would truthfully be a nightmare, because you could follow me support into just a Surf with Blastoise and just start running house, which you can Surf and Earthquake, which regular Blastoise could already do to a somewhat degree, but it's a lot more passive. And stuff like, for example, Gmax Blastoise has to worry about while being Gmax at least the spread option for that. You don't get that. So I feel like with this in mind, Mega Blastoise also being usable in singles definitely puts it in easy S tier. Regular Blastoise gets a solid B tier. I think it's a really cool option. Obviously, it has fake out support for VGC if you want to run it pre-Mega. I think as well, just not being forced to Mega this is really good, and the fact this is also kind of usable in singles in any way, shape, or form with Smash, and also support with Rapid Spin. It's a cool Yu-Gi-Oh Pokemon in BDSP too, so it's not even like it's bad in BDSP either, where you lose out on a lot of cool options for it. But I definitely think that in general, this is a really good Pokemon in my opinion. It just sort of, it's really technical and situational, but it could definitely do some work depending on the team support. Meganium. Meganium, truthfully, is probably the only other starter besides these two that will be in the F tier. I love Meganium. I love Chikorita. I know a lot of people hate them design-wise. I actually really love Chikorita. It's my second favorite grass type. But yeah, no, I think this is a terrible Pokemon. I really love it, though. But it is terrible. It has nothing really good moveset-wise. It's best case, like, what, Synth Screen's grass move? But it's still just, there's so many better options than it. Regular Typhlosion. Regular Typhlosion gets a C tier. I think it's truthfully nothing else, just better Zard. They have pretty similar coverage except for Zard gets flying, but to be fair, Hurricane is weakened in Sun, so if you're going to abuse Solar Power, that is a bit of a discredit. And also with Typhlosion, you get really good options like Eruption and Solar Beam, so this is a really good Sun option. And it's less Rock weak, so you're less threatened running Specs or Scarf to really be weakened by hazards. So I think it's an edge, at least, albeit it's a small one. I think the gap between these two is really slim. Like, I would probably put Zard as the best in this tier personally. And it's purely just off of its Sword and Shield usage, whereas Mega Style is kind of hard to use in that decks currently. If this was like Renegade Platinum Mega Style, this would be an easy B, A tier, but sadly it's not. So I do think it's actually the weakest in this tier. Actually, no, Samron's weakest in this tier, what am I saying? But it's the weakest among the actually notable Pokemon in this tier. Regardless of, we have Regular Sceptile. Regular Sceptile is interesting. This is also a D tier, truthfully. But I will say, this actually has some niche usage, considering stuff like, for example, in, I guess, Battle Spot, you could run, like, Dynamax with Unburden, pop your Grassy Seed that way, and it could actually be pretty good in that regard. I wouldn't call this a good idea, but it's something, and I think it's something enough. Also, with its BSPO usage, it's unironically not terrible. I feel like it's sort of niche in every metagame it plays in, but I don't think it's outright terrible in any of them, so I gotta give it a D tier. As considering, for example, BDSP, you have stuff like Specs, which actually unironically does a lot of damage, considering a lot of Pokemon can't touch it speed-wise, and between Dragon Fighting and Grass, it hits enough, actually, to where it's a really hard Pokemon to switch on. Sword and Shield, for example, even if you were to run a Spec set, you could run it with, like, a Terrain Team and pop Grassy Seed, get an Acrobatics set, or just some Burden Sweep, which is really cool. And whether it's VGC or singles, it's at least, as I said, it's really just a niche Pokemon in every metagame it touches. I think it's the best way to put it. I don't know why I'm over-explaining this. Blaziken truthfully just gets an A tier. Not that it's worse than any of these Pokemon. I truly think it's a Pokemon that's inherently better. But I feel like if we were to take metagame perspective into account, the fact that this is not breached, even just OU in Sword and Shield, is really concerning for just trying to put a tier on this Pokemon. If we go into National Dex as well, this is another Pokemon that, again, it can't even breach the BL, let alone the OU tier for Nat X, which is kind of concerning when trying to, put this Pokemon up. Like, it's a Pokemon that on paper should be able to maul everything, and I genuinely do believe it is inherently better than everything in the A tier. But I think if we're tiering off of its competitive usage, I can't in good faith put it in S tier with Mega Blastoise and Blaziken, which actually did manage to get themselves at least banned in a format. So Blaziken is an A tier. I really hate that I did that. I feel like it's objectively criminal. I'll at least move it to the front, if nothing else, because it is, again, inherently better as a Pokemon than anything else in A tier. But the fact that it has not made a staple in any of these metagames, I guess besides BDSPOU, but if it really couldn't do BDSPOU, I would have cried. That would have been truly the end for all Blaziken fans. But with that metagame, obviously you're losing out on a lot of checks. There's stuff like Zygarde, Tapu Fini, Slowbro with Teleport at least, because it doesn't have Teleport in that metagame. A lot of different things that would normally check it, so I can't in good faith, take that into consideration for Blaziken's rating. It does help me at least put it in the front of A though, if nothing else, so I'll give it that. But I can't in good faith put it in the same tier as Mega Blaziken and Mega Blastoise purely because of that. Swampert gets a solid B tier. It's a really good Pokemon. I think this is definitely piped up a lot. I think that the biggest issue though is the fact that currently in Sword and Shield, the fact that Hail is so viable, with stuff like Alolan Ninetales and Arctozolt being as good Pokemon as they are, because they're shockingly enough actually really viable Pokemon, albeit on a bit of a decline, but they're still really viable. Swampert is still a really good pivot though. It's a really good niche rocker. I wouldn't call this any standout sort of Pokemon or anything. I feel like it really fluctuates more than, it's a really fluctuating Pokemon, but it's one of those Pokemon that could be really destructive depending on the archetype. It's also pretty okay in Sword and Shield, not Dex. It's pretty not good in VGC, but it's also really good in BDSP. I think a B tier is truthfully a really good fit for this. Torterra is honestly an easy D tier. I'm going to put it in front of Samurott. It's really all it gets. Grass Ground is a pretty cool typing, defensively speaking, besides the Ice weakness, of course, which truthfully should not be that big of a deal in my opinion. You have two really good typings, one in Steel and the other one in Water, which especially in Water, you should be able to find a good Ice switch in my opinion, and make this thing a really good rocker in like a really low tier format. It's really cool in, at the very least, like BPSP lower metagames. For example, this currently is a Pokemon, I believe it resides in UU, I want to say. Nope, that is for doubles. I want to look for BDSP UU. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this resides in UU or RU. Yeah, this currently is an RU, so it didn't even drop to the lowest metagame, which to be fair, that standard is pretty low. It's like absurdly low, but it actually carves itself out a nice RU niche or something else. It's even usable in UU and OU. I know for a fact I've used it in both metagames, and it is fairly okay in those. But it's one of those Pokemon, it's similar to, I guess the best way to compare it is probably Gastrodon, where it's sort of viable in every tier above it, but it's never, at least as far as BDSP, I'm specifically talking BDSP here, it's viable in every tier above it, but it's never going to be good enough to really consistently stay in those tiers. Just like a Gastrodon is consistently banned across, like for example, Gen 7 OU and Gen 8 OU for Sword and Shield, it is consistently there, but it is never good enough to actually be a listed Pokemon in those tiers. It's just always good enough to be niche. And I feel like that's the best way to decide, at least for BDSP, which is truthfully the only thing keeping it out of F tier. Superior gets an easy C tier. Superior gets B tier. I think that the best reason for this is because of the fact that the only metagame right now that is usable in is Nat Dex, which still does allow hidden powers. But if we were to compare this, let's say, to any other metagame that you could maybe eventually bring this into, stuff like, for example, Sword and Shields or BDSPs, where it does not have it would never get hidden power in those gens. I think this is definitely lackluster, and even still comparing it to some of these top Pokemon, Megapart, for example, it helps Rain be such a broken playstyle, and pulling with Roost is an obnoxious thing, especially as far as BDSP goes. Infernape is a top 5 Pokemon it's a top 5 usage Pokemon in BDSPOU. I know it's definitely falling out of favor viability-wise, but it is still one of the most used Pokemon in the tier. Megazord X is obviously a really strong breaker, and it at least carves out its own niche, even among the typing and also starters in general. Superior, though, while it's a good Pokemon, it definitely doesn't do any of that. It's really just sort of a middling Nat Dex OU Pokemon even still. So I can't really, in good faith, put it higher than B tier,
but that's really the only format it really has going for it. Actually, it seems like it's A tier now. I didn't think it was that high. I still feel like it's definitively worse than all these Pokemon, but I will, if nothing else, move it to the front of B tier. I feel like, if nothing else, it deserves that much at least, but I can't in good faith put it in front of any of the metagame toppers that we're seeing above, besides Blaziken, which is just banned at BDSP and then kind of lackluster and everything else. Emboar, I'll be honest, gets end of D tier. It's just really good with Reckless. That's really it. It's not that good of a Pokemon though, outright. But it's one of those, again, like really good low tier Pokemon. Actually, I'll put it in the front. To be fair, this is definitely better than like a Zard. Even Zard currently, it's better than that in like Ultra Sun and Moon. But it's one of those very lackluster Pokemon. Samurott just gets right in front of Torterra, if nothing else. Just Samurott at least was a really good NU wrecker back when he was usable in metagames. But I wouldn't call it great or anything. It's just pretty okay. Chestnut again gets a solid D tier. I'll put this in front of Samurott actually. This is really good. Actually, I'll put it in front of. I'll put Chestnut actually in C tier. It's a pretty okay defensive fighting type. It's cool for spikes at least, which a lot of starters actually lack. So in comparison to those, it has a nice hazard niche. Really, the only one is the other grass fighting type actually that I can think of for spikes at least. So it's kind of funny. Oh, that's there. It's either grass fighting and then Greninja. That's the other one. But I think at the very least, Chestnut is still a pretty good option. I just don't think it's anything insane. Chestnut definitely has, I will say, Fizz going for it as a grass type. It's really nice for stuff like Earthquake, but it's just kind of lackluster speed-wise, and its speed is also definitely asking a lot to be desired for, especially as a Scald switch in. The fact that it's physical grass kind of sucks. If Chestnut was a special attacker with the high Fizz def that it has, I think this could be an easy B tier or maybe even A. But I think the fact that it is so Fizz def invested while also having low speed def and then also being Scald weak is definitely something out of its favor in my opinion. Delphox definitely gets a solid in C tier, I think, as well. Psychic Fire is actually a pretty cool typing, with Fire being a really good killer to Steel types. However, I think at the same time, though, it's just generally low bulk as a Psychic type, definitely hurts it a bit. Though it's a pretty good cleaner, I just kind of wish it had like 110 speed or at least a little bit more Fizz def bulk. You know, it kind of got hit at both ends pretty badly, but it's still a nice lower tier option for Fires as far as they go. Ash Greninja, I'm going to give Ash Greninja A tier, and I'm going to give Protean S. I know that inherently, Ash Greninja is the better option as far as OU goes, but it's by such a slim margin, like it's quite literally, to put it in perspective, Ash Greninja is currently an A tier Pokemon, and Greninja is an A- Pokemon in ratings go, and I think that their difference in draft setting, as well as the fact that Ash Greninja isn't even usable in doubles, whereas Greninja was an okay at best niche map block user in doubles, more so in ORAS if anything, less so in like Ultra Sun and Moon. But I think that alone, just the fact that Greninja has other metagame usage to be off of, even if it is such a slim amount of metagame. And on top of that as well, Greninja also is inherently a lot better in terms of stuff like, for example, Ubers, as well as the fact that it is a lot better in draft. Definitely helps it get that slight edge above Ash Greninja. It is a very slim margin, to be fair. But I think the fact that Ash Greninja really is rain dependent to be usable, in my opinion, whereas Greninja can function on a lot of different playstyles. It has a few really small things, but all of them add up to put it slightly above Ash Greninja. Incineroar truthfully just gets A tier, if nothing else, for its VGC presence. Its VGC presence is so good, I would put it easy at the front of S if it's just VGC tier list, but its single presence is so average, I have to put it in A tier to lower it. I think that's just, it speaks for itself. Incineroar is top, like easily one of, if not the best Pokemon of VGC. I personally am leaning a bit more towards regular Thundurus actually currently, but I would still put this in my top 5 very easily. I think if, like, I would put Thundurus in my first, and then Incineroar is my clear, like, very close second, and they have a huge gap between those two, in my personal opinion, with, like, Kyogre being the third. But Incineroar has a lot of usage and versatility. It's a really good option for stuff like Shuka, AV, Weakness Policy, etc. in VGC. And Tingle's even, it's still a pretty cool boots user with a nice pivot with stuff like Parting Shot and U-Turn, so it's not bad. I just think that its singles usage is a lot to be desired for. Gmax really cool Gmax Pokemon, honestly. Because of the fact that we're just hearing VGC off of this is a really cool Gmax user. Easy on par with Venusaur. Quite literally, this is the grass you go to for Venusaur's job, just you don't need sun for it. And even still, you can still run it in sun. I just would probably run Venusaur at that point. But its priority outside of... Actually, I'm going to put Gmax Rillaboom in S, purely because of the fact that Rillaboom is a slightly better Pokemon as a blanket. Venusaur is obnoxiously good on sun, and that's about it. Rillaboom, on the other hand, is really just good on a lot of playstyles, and Gmax Rillaboom as well, having priority in base form as well as Fake Out and Grassy Glide. Well, in both Fake Out and Grassy Glide, helps it a ton. I think this easily helps out a lot. And Drum Soul is also a nice mold breaker, which I did not know before, which is really good because while the overtime is really useful, stuff like Venusaur and Rillaboom existing alone and being two of the most used Pokemon definitely hurts at least the ability for the overtime to be hitting every single Pokemon coming out. Whereas the mold breaker is really nice actually for some specific abilities, stuff like, for example, Mimikyu. And I get those are more niche matchups, but there's some matchups that, for example, partners with Rillaboom might be struggling with. This being stuff like Kyogre, for example, if you're going for more Tailwind route, having stuff like Mimikyu getting up Trick Room through Disguise could be kind of annoying. And even if you don't include Pokemon like Mimikyu, for example, you do have a lot of other niche cases where Mold Breaker could be the useful option. And you also just hit for consistent 160, which honestly, that 160 alone hits harder than any other normal max move would be hitting from Venusaur. So I think with that in mind, especially with the instant terrain boosting, this Pokemon just has too much favoring it. Its max move sure is a bit more niche from Venusaur's, but I think that the damage boost being higher as well as the inherent terrain boost too helps this Pokemon way too much. Easy S tier. Cinderace, honestly, I'm gonna give it an A tier. I think this is a bit much to be desired in VGC to put it in S tier. It's probably, even as far as a singles perspective goes, the lowest S tier we would have by a good amount in my opinion. And I think that including doubles into that definitely weakens to A, though it is a strong A. I think it is a strong A for sure. I think that Cinderace G-Max as well just literally goes in the same exact tier as this. Definitely, in my opinion, not exactly the best Pokemon in doubles, but to be fair, it has some good matchups. Max Airstream and Max Knuckle are really good options on it, and it inherently has really high damage output thanks to Libero. But I think that the options it gets coverage-wise are fairly predictable. You always know going into a game what set it's going to run, because it's going to run Life Orb, because there's not really another option you really have in VGC, in my opinion, for Cinderace. But yeah, I think it's really good. I just think that inherently it's just under par for S. Like, literally, it is a sliver under par for S. In terms of Inteleon G-Max, honestly, this is a D tier. There's no reason to use Inteleon as a G-Max option. In fact, using Inteleon as a G-Max option, in my opinion, is the option you're using to just have fun. This is the equivalent of using... Actually, I'm going to put Inteleon G-Max in F tier. There's quite literally no reason to use this. Actually, no, never mind. Hydro Snipe for stuff like Gastrodon actually is kind of okay, but this is really the option you're going for when you're really trying to get a YouTube thumbnail. There's nothing else for it, but I think the fact that you would hit stuff like Gastrodon, which is a really good Pokemon right now, at least deserves it out of F tier, because the F tiers are abhorrently bad. These are just the Pokemon that are not good. So there is a difference. I'm going to move Emboar out of D tier, by the way, with that in mind. I think inherently just a lot better than these. Regular Inteleon also gets a C tier, just because it has some cool utility. Specs is really nice. Fast screen option is really nice, as we get seen from Pokemon like Koko and Pult in general OU tiers. It's just a really okay option in lowers. I wouldn't call this a good Pokemon though. Inteleon just a really fast water, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a water type where you usually want a bulkier one. But it's not bad as a specs user, I guess. With Decidueye next, Decidueye gets an easy C tier. Typing is pretty cool. It's a really cool pivot, really cool default option. I wouldn't say it's great though. It sadly is just missing out in every department, whether it's 70 speed, the fact that it's just barely hitting over 100 in both offenses, the fact that its Phys Def is really low as defensive option. It's just barely missing the gun in every area, but it has a lot going for it though. It's a very versatile Pokemon, just jack of all trades, master of none by a long shot. Primarina gets an easy B tier. Typing is really cool, and added Flip Turn is honestly really amazing for it this gen. I think this is a very easy, really good Pokemon in terms of even just OU for Sword and Shield. Typing is really nice, and if I remember correctly, this is a fairly niche Pokemon in OU, but it's still kind of existing, quote unquote. Yeah, it's a C+, which honestly isn't that bad. I know it can soft check Pull. It's really good for stuff like, for example, Heatran. It's a soft check. You can run it with like AVR specs, and it's honestly not that bad. It's just not really stand out. And in terms of VGC, I know at least before the max formats, this was a not bad Pokemon. Like, it wasn't great, but it was an okay Pokemon at best. With stuff like Weakest Policy, for example, with Dynamax being okay on it. And it has obviously Liquid Voice, you know, to try and at least get stab off of stuff like Hyper Voice being spread for only forward-facing Pokemon. I don't know if that was even run, but I know it was at least a thing, I guess. Well, I know at least it could be a thing, I should say. I don't know if it was. I didn't keep up with Series 11. But I mean, in general, Primarina has a lot going for it. Parasong Spreads are also really cool for doubles, at least if nothing else. And the typing is really not that bad. As far as the doubles perspective goes, this goes pretty far against a lot of high-tier Pokemon, albeit not stuff like Alecki and Rillaboom. But for stuff like Incineroar, for example, in Lando T, at least offensively speaking, and Pult, you have some really good matchups. And before the restricted formats, at least, that was pretty useful for it. Can't really speak on it in Series 12. I'll be honest, I just don't have enough knowledge in Series 12, at least as far as Prim goes. But it's a cool Pokemon, at least in those. Finally, though, we have Rillaboom. And Rillaboom, I'm going to give S rank. Because unlike with Incineroar, this is not only a top tier Pokemon in VGC, even as a raw Pokemon without maxing, which honestly I think that regular Rillaboom is slightly better than Max, but that's a whole other discussion to be had. But also it's a really good Pokemon in OU. If we were to pull this, for example, in the other OU metagames, this is a B tier Pokemon in Sword and Shield. In terms of National Dex OU, I believe Rillaboom is, yeah, it's also a B tier Pokemon actually. So the fact that it is, unlike Incineroar, able to actually perform in other metagames, I think definitely does add on some good usage for this, if nothing else. I just realized my webcam is autofocusing. I'm so sorry, guys. But I think if nothing else, the fact that this Pokemon is able to actually somewhat perform in other metagames definitely does give it some good usability, in my opinion. Because, for example, Incineroar really is performing at best in like the RU, NU sort of tiers in standard OU, whereas Rillaboom is just in the OU tier. And it's on top of that as well. It's a really good VGC Pokemon. It's not even that terrible in Ubers, albeit it's a lot worse in Ubers, to be fair. But at least when it was allowed to max, it was an okay Pokemon, you know, with Max AV being a really good Kylo check. So I'll give it that. Like, I don't think that, I'm not counting the Ubers into its tier, to be fair. I think between VGC and OU alone, it speaks for itself, considering it's a solid Pokemon, at least solid enough in OU, and it is a top tier Pokemon of VGC. This is probably one of the most fluid Pokemon you can get in terms of versatile starter. It's nowhere near, to be fair, it's nowhere near Gren, Blastoise, or Blaziken at least. I think it's at least versatile enough to compete with them as far as usability goes. Now, what starter would I say is the best? Now, personally, I think as an individual, in any individual format, I think that Blaziken Mega has the highest ceiling of any Pokemon. As a blanket starter, potential for what it can do as general. I think that as a versatile Pokemon, though, it would have to be Rillaboom. I think Rillaboom offers the most to any specific format, no matter what one you're playing. But ultimately, it will never be the best option, regardless if you're playing singles or doubles, in my opinion. Because if you're playing doubles, the inherent best starter is Incineroar. As good as Rillaboom is, and it's just second place, it is the inherent best. Well, Incineroar is the inherent best. And as far as singles goes, this is probably still a top 5 option, if not just barely breaking out of top 5 with like a 6th or 7th place. But it's, again, not the best Pokemon. So hopefully you guys enjoy this tier list. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe. And with that said, shout out to our channel members being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Zeke Zero, Rika Hoshizora, Mia, Randy Chappa, and Pokemon fan Magic Cernius. Your guys' support is greatly appreciated, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, peace out, guys.